The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Thomas Hartwell adjusted his red ceremonial jacket for what would be the last time as a loyal guardsman. 23 years of unwavering service had carved deep lines into his weathered face, each one telling a story of dedication that ran deeper than the Thames itself. His polished black boots reflected the golden light streaming through the palace gates, and his tall black bearskin hat sat perfectly positioned, just as it had every single day since he first donned the uniform at 18 years old. Thomas had always been different from the other guards. While his colleagues maintained the stoic silence required of their position, his eyes held a warmth that palace visitors often noticed. Children would wave at him during the changing of the guard ceremony, and despite the strict protocol forbidding any response, the corners of his eyes would crinkle ever so slightly in acknowledgement. His fellow guardsmen respected him not just for his impeccable record, but for the genuine care he showed for the institution they all served. The Hartwell family had a proud tradition of royal service spanning 4 generations. Thomas's great-grandfather had served under King George V, his grandfather under King George VI, and his father had been present during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. The family home in a modest London suburb was filled with photographs, medals, and certificates that documented decades of faithful service to the crown. Thomas had grown up hearing stories of royal ceremonies, state visits, and the quiet moments that revealed the humanity behind the pageantry. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, Thomas felt as though he had lost a grandmother. He had stood guard during countless events in her presence, had been part of the security detail for her morning walks in the palace gardens, and had witnessed her genuine kindness toward the staff who served her. The Queen had once stopped to ask about his family when she noticed him looking particularly tired after working consecutive double shifts. That brief conversation, lasting no more than 2 minutes, had meant everything to a man who had dedicated his life to protecting her. The transition period following the Queen's death had been emotionally challenging for everyone at the palace. King Charles III's ascension brought changes that rippled through every level of the royal household. New protocols were established, staff assignments were reshuffled, and the atmosphere that had been carefully cultivated over 70 years began to shift. Thomas watched these changes with the quiet observation skills that had made him an exceptional guardsman, noting how different personalities brought different energies to the ancient institution. Queen Camilla's role as the new queen consort introduced dynamics that many longtime palace staff found difficult to navigate. Unlike Queen Elizabeth II, who had grown into her role over decades and developed relationships with staff members that spanned their entire careers, Queen Camilla arrived with her own expectations and way of doing things. The adjustment period was challenging for everyone, but particularly for those who had served the previous regime for decades. Thomas first noticed the changes during the small, private ceremonies that took place away from public view. Queen Camilla's interactions with staff were formal and distant, lacking the warmth that had characterized her predecessor's approach. Where Queen Elizabeth II had known the names of longtime staff members and inquired about their families, Queen Camilla maintained strict professional boundaries that left little room for the personal connections that had made palace service feel like more than just a job. The morning that would change everything began like any other. Thomas arrived at the palace before dawn, as was his custom, to prepare for his duties. The security briefing revealed that Queen Camilla would be hosting a private reception for several charitable organizations she patronized. The event was small by palace standards, with fewer than 50 guests expected, but it required the full ceremonial protocol that had been the foundation of Thomas's training. As Thomas took his position in the state reception room, he reflected on the thousands of similar events he had overseen during his career. He had stood silent and vigilant while world leaders discussed matters of international importance, had maintained his composure during family celebrations and moments of national mourning, and had never once wavered in his commitment to the dignity and security of the royal family. His reputation among his colleagues was spotless, his performance reviews consistently excellent, and his dedication unquestioned. The guests began arriving mid-morning, a mixture of charity executives, notable philanthropists, and community leaders whose work aligned with Queen Camilla's interests. Thomas observed each arrival with the trained eye of a security professional, noting faces, behaviors, and anything that might require attention. It was routine work for someone of his experience, the kind of event he had managed hundreds of times before with quiet efficiency. Queen Camilla entered the reception room with the bearing of someone comfortable with command. She moved through the gathering with practiced grace, offering words of encouragement to the charity representatives and discussing their work with what appeared to be genuine interest. Thomas watched from his position near the main entrance, ready to respond to any security concern while maintaining the invisible presence that was the hallmark of professional royal protection. The conversation topics ranged from children's education initiatives to environmental conservation projects, causes that had been central to Queen Camilla's public work for many years. The guests were clearly honored to have this opportunity for direct interaction with the Queen Consort, and their enthusiasm was evident in their animated discussions about their respective organizations' accomplishments and goals. As the reception progressed, Thomas noticed subtle changes in Queen Camilla's demeanor that suggested the formal part of the event was drawing to a close. After years of observing royal protocols, he could read the signals that indicated when ceremonies were transitioning from public representation to private conclusion. It was during this transition that Queen Camilla made an announcement that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of Thomas's life and career. Queen Camilla moved to the center of the room and requested everyone's attention. She thanked the guests for their dedication to charitable work and expressed her commitment to supporting their efforts in her role as Queen Consort. Then, in a gesture that she described as a symbol of unity and mutual respect, she invited everyone present to join her in a moment of acknowledgement that would demonstrate the collaborative spirit she hoped to foster in her new position. The specific request was unprecedented in Thomas's experience. Queen Camilla asked everyone in the room, including all palace staff present, to kneel as a sign of respect and commitment to the charitable causes being celebrated. She explained that this gesture would represent the humility and service that should characterize everyone's approach to helping others, from the volunteers working in local communities to the royal family members who served as patrons of charitable organizations. The guests immediately complied with the request, apparently viewing it as an honor to participate in such a meaningful gesture. Other palace staff members also began to kneel, following what they understood to be a direct instruction from the Queen Consort. The room filled with the rustle of fabric and quiet movement as dozens of people lowered themselves in response to Queen Camilla's call for unity. Thomas remained standing. The decision was not made out of disrespect or defiance, but from a deep understanding of the protocols that had governed royal protection for generations. Royal guards were trained never to compromise their ability to respond to security threats, and kneeling would have made it impossible for Thomas to quickly assess and react to any danger that might arise. More importantly, the traditions of royal service that had been passed down through his family emphasized that a guard's duty was to protect the monarchy as an institution, not to participate in ceremonial gestures that might compromise that protection. As the seconds passed, and Thomas remained upright while everyone else had knelt, the attention in the room gradually shifted toward him. Queen Camilla's eyes met his, and he could see her confusion transforming into something that resembled displeasure. The guests began to notice the anomaly, glancing between the standing guardsmen and the kneeling Queen Consort with growing awareness that something unexpected was happening. Thomas maintained his military bearing, standing at attention with his eyes focused straight ahead as he had been trained to do in situations requiring discipline and composure. His decision was not impulsive or emotional, but based on 23 years of professional training and a deep understanding of his responsibilities. He knew that his primary obligation was to ensure the safety and security of everyone in the room, including Queen Camilla herself, and that participating in the ceremonial gesture would compromise his ability to fulfill that obligation. The tension in the room became palpable as Queen Camilla remained kneeling while fixing Thomas with a direct stare. The charitable organization representatives looked uncertain about whether they should remain in their kneeling positions or stand, caught between their desire to show respect to the Queen Consort and their growing awareness that something significant was occurring between her and the guardsmen. Queen Camilla's voice cut through the silence with a tone that carried both authority and displeasure. She addressed Thomas directly, asking why he had not followed her instruction to kneel with the rest of the gathering. Her question was delivered with the expectation of immediate compliance, the tone of someone unaccustomed to having her directives questioned or ignored. Thomas's response was measured and respectful, but firm. He explained that his position as a royal guard required him to maintain constant vigilance and readiness to respond to any potential security concerns. He stated that royal protection protocols, established over decades and proven through experience, prevented him from compromising his ability to safeguard everyone present. His voice carried no disrespect, but it also carried no willingness to compromise on what he understood to be his fundamental duty. The explanation seemed to deepen Queen Camilla's displeasure rather than resolve the situation. She informed Thomas that his interpretation of protocol was unnecessarily rigid, and that the gesture she had requested was appropriate for the circumstances. She emphasized that her position as queen consort gave her the authority to determine appropriate protocols for events in her presence, and she expected all palace staff to follow her guidance without question. Thomas found himself in an impossible position. On one hand, he understood the importance of respecting the authority of the queen consort and maintaining the harmonious relationships that were essential to effective palace operations. On the other hand, he could not in good conscience abandon the principles and training that had guided his entire career in royal service. The protocols that prevented him from kneeling were not arbitrary rules, but carefully developed procedures designed to protect the very people he served. The standoff continued for several long minutes, with Queen Camilla maintaining her kneeling position while waiting for Thomas to comply, and Thomas maintaining his standing position while everyone else in the room watched the unprecedented confrontation unfold. The guests remained kneeling, uncertain about what was expected of them in this unexpected situation. Finally, Queen Camilla rose from her kneeling position, her movement sharp and decisive. She approached Thomas directly, her displeasure now clearly visible to everyone present. She informed him that his refusal to follow her instruction was unacceptable and that there would be consequences for his defiance. The formal tone of her words made it clear that she viewed his adherence to protocol not as professional dedication, but as personal disrespect. Thomas responded with the same measured respect he had shown throughout the confrontation. He acknowledged Queen Camilla's authority and expressed his deep commitment to serving the royal family with honor and distinction. However, he also made it clear that he could not compromise on the security protocols that were fundamental to his role as a royal guard. He suggested that if there were concerns about his interpretation of proper protocol, those concerns should be addressed through the appropriate channels within the palace hierarchy. The reception effectively ended with Queen Camilla's departure from the room. The guests, clearly uncomfortable with having witnessed what appeared to be a serious disagreement between the queen consort and a member of palace staff, began to leave shortly afterward. Thomas remained at his post until all visitors had departed, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the knowledge that his career was likely to face serious consequences. The aftermath of the confrontation spread through the palace staff with the speed that characterized all significant news in the close-knit community of royal employees. Within hours, everyone from senior administrators to kitchen staff had heard about the guardsman who had refused to kneel for Queen Camilla. The reactions were mixed, with some staff members expressing admiration for Thomas's adherence to protocol, while others worried about the precedent his actions might set. That evening, Thomas returned to his family home for what he suspected might be one of the last times as an active member of the Royal Guard. His wife, Margaret, could see immediately that something significant had occurred. Over dinner, he recounted the day's events to her and to their 2 adult children, explaining his decision and the potential consequences he might face. Margaret had been married to Thomas for 25 years and understood better than anyone the depth of his commitment to royal service. She had watched him work through illnesses, family emergencies, and personal hardships because he believed his duty to the crown was sacred. She also knew that his decision to remain standing had not been made lightly or out of any disrespect for Queen Camilla personally. Their son James, who had recently completed his university degree and was considering following in his father's footsteps with a career in public service, struggled to understand how adherence to protocol could create such a serious conflict. Their daughter Sarah, who worked as a teacher in London, expressed concern about the impact this situation might have on their father's career and the family's financial security. Thomas explained to his family that his decision had been based on principles that went beyond personal convenience or career considerations. He had taken an oath to protect and serve the monarchy, and he believed that oath required him to maintain his ability to provide security even when doing so created uncomfortable situations. He acknowledged that there might be consequences for his actions, but he expressed confidence that he had made the right choice given his understanding of his responsibilities. As the family discussed the situation, Thomas received a telephone call from his supervisor within the palace guard hierarchy. The conversation was brief and formal, informing Thomas that he was to report for a disciplinary hearing the following morning. The supervisor's tone suggested that the matter was being taken very seriously at the highest levels of palace administration. Margaret asked Thomas if he regretted his decision, if there was any part of him that wished he had simply knelt when Queen Camilla requested it. Thomas considered the question carefully before responding that while he regretted the conflict and the discomfort it had caused, he could not regret following the principles that had guided his entire career. He explained that compromising on security protocols, even in what appeared to be a harmless situation, could establish dangerous precedents that might compromise safety in more serious circumstances. The evening concluded with Thomas preparing for what would likely be his final night as an active royal guardsman. He polished his uniform one last time, reviewed the oath he had taken when he first joined the guard, and reflected on the thousands of days he had spent in service to the crown. Despite the uncertainty facing him, he felt a quiet confidence that he had honored the trust placed in him by generations of his family and by the institution he had sworn to protect. The next morning would bring consequences that would test not only Thomas's resolve, but also the principles upon which the entire system of royal service was built. His decision to remain standing while Queen Camilla knelt had created a conflict that would force everyone involved to examine the balance between personal authority and institutional protocol, between innovation and tradition, and between individual conscience and collective expectation. The disciplinary hearing room in Buckingham Palace had witnessed countless meetings over the decades, but rarely had the atmosphere been as tense as it was on the morning Thomas Hartwell faced the panel that would determine his fate. The room itself spoke of centuries of tradition, with dark oak paneling that had absorbed the voices of generations of palace officials, portraits of former monarchs gazing down with silent authority, and furnishings that embodied the weight of institutional memory. Thomas entered the room at precisely 9 o'clock, his uniform impeccable despite the circumstances that had brought him there. His military bearing remained steady as he faced the three-person panel consisting of Sir Edmund Worthington, the Deputy Private Secretary to the King, Colonel Patricia Henley, Head of Palace Security, and Mrs. Diana Crawford, the Senior Human Resources Director for the Royal Household. Each panel member represented different aspects of palace operations, ensuring that all relevant perspectives would be considered in evaluating Thomas's actions. Sir Edmund, a man in his late 50s whose own career in royal service spanned nearly 3 decades, opened the proceedings with a formal statement acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the situation. He emphasized that while the panel respected Thomas's long record of exemplary service, the incident involving Queen Camilla had raised serious questions about protocol adherence and the chain of command within the royal household. His tone was neither hostile nor sympathetic, but rather reflected the gravity with which palace administration viewed any disruption to established procedures. Colonel Henley, whose background in military security had prepared her for complex situations involving competing priorities, asked Thomas to provide his own account of the events that had led to the hearing. She emphasized that the panel wanted to understand not just what had happened, but the reasoning behind Thomas's decision-making process. Her questions reflected a professional understanding of security protocols while also acknowledging the unique challenges of balancing protection responsibilities with respect for royal authority. Thomas's recounting of the incident was detailed and precise, reflecting both his training as an observer and his understanding that accuracy would be crucial to any fair evaluation of his actions. He described Queen Camilla's request for everyone to kneel, the immediate compliance of guests and other staff members, and his own decision to remain standing based on his understanding of security protocols. His explanation emphasized that his choice had been driven by professional judgment rather than personal defiance. Mrs. Crawford's questions focused on the broader implications of Thomas's actions for palace staff relations and the precedent his behavior might set for future interactions between royal family members and employees. She asked whether Thomas understood that his refusal to follow Queen Camilla's instruction could be interpreted as undermining her authority and creating an uncomfortable situation for everyone present. Her concerns reflected the human resources perspective on maintaining harmonious working relationships within the complex social hierarchy of the royal household. The panel also questioned Thomas about alternative approaches he might have taken to address his security concerns while still showing respect for Queen Camilla's request. Sir Edmund suggested that Thomas could have briefly explained his protocol constraints to Queen Camilla before the ceremony began, potentially avoiding the public confrontation that had characterized the actual incident. This line of questioning revealed the panel's interest in whether the conflict could have been prevented through better communication. Thomas acknowledged that advanced communication might have prevented the public nature of the disagreement, but he maintained that his fundamental position would have remained the same. He explained that royal protection protocols existed specifically to prevent situations where guards might be placed in compromised positions, and that these protocols had been developed through decades of experience in managing security challenges. He emphasized that his adherence to these guidelines was not negotiable, regardless of the specific circumstances or the person making requests that conflicted with security requirements. Colonel Henley pressed Thomas on the specifics of the security concerns that had motivated his decision. She asked him to identify the particular threats or vulnerabilities that would have been created by his kneeling for the brief duration requested by Queen Camilla. Her questions were designed to determine whether Thomas's security concerns were based on legitimate professional assessment or on an overly rigid interpretation of guidelines that might be applied with more flexibility in appropriate circumstances. Thomas's response demonstrated the depth of his professional training and experience. He explained that effective security required constant situational awareness and the ability to respond immediately to any potential threat. Kneeling would have compromised his visual field, slowed his reaction time, and potentially created confusion about his role and responsibilities in the event of an emergency. He noted that security protocols were designed to be comprehensive and consistent precisely because it was impossible to predict when seemingly routine situations might suddenly require immediate protective action. The questioning also explored Thomas's understanding of the evolving nature of royal protocols under King Charles III and Queen Camilla's leadership. Sir Edmund asked whether Thomas recognized that new approaches to royal engagement might require corresponding adjustments in how palace staff interpreted their traditional roles and responsibilities. This line of inquiry reflected broader questions about how centuries-old institutions could adapt to contemporary expectations while maintaining their essential character. Thomas expressed his respect for the need for institutional evolution and his willingness to adapt to new approaches that enhanced the royal family's ability to serve the public effectively. However, he also maintained that certain fundamental principles, particularly those related to security and protection, should not be compromised in the pursuit of innovation or change. He argued that the safety of the royal family and their guests represented a core responsibility that transcended other considerations. Mrs. Crawford raised concerns about the impact of Thomas's actions on other palace staff members who had witnessed the incident. She noted that several employees had expressed confusion about proper protocol and worry about potential conflicts between their loyalty to long-time procedures and their obligation to follow direct instructions from royal family members. Her questions highlighted the broader organizational challenges created when established procedures and new expectations appeared to conflict. The panel also examined Thomas's personnel record, reviewing performance evaluations, commendations, and feedback from colleagues spanning his entire career. The documentation painted a picture of an exemplary employee whose dedication and professionalism had never been questioned prior to this incident. Several supervisors had noted Thomas's reliability, his positive relationships with other staff members, and his ability to handle challenging situations with discretion and judgment. Colonel Henley read aloud from a commendation Thomas had received 5 years earlier for his handling of a security incident during a state dinner. The citation praised his quick thinking and professional response to a situation involving a guest who had exhibited concerning behavior. The colonel noted that the same qualities being praised in that commendation seemed to be at the heart of his current situation, raising questions about consistency in how the palace evaluated guard actions. During a brief recess, Thomas reflected on the trajectory that had brought him to this moment. He thought about his father's stories of serving during Queen Elizabeth II's early reign, when protocols were perhaps more clearly defined and the expectations placed on royal staff were more straightforward. The modern royal family operated in a more complex environment, with greater public scrutiny and evolving social expectations that sometimes created tension with traditional approaches. When the hearing resumed, Sir Edmund asked Thomas about his future intentions regarding royal service. He wanted to understand whether Thomas remained committed to his role despite the current difficulties, and whether he believed it would be possible to continue serving effectively given the conflict that had arisen with Queen Camilla. This question addressed the practical considerations of whether Thomas could realistically return to his duties if the panel chose to retain him. Thomas's answer reflected both his deep commitment to royal service and his understanding of the practical challenges that might make his continued employment difficult. He expressed his desire to continue serving the crown and his belief that his experience and dedication remained valuable assets to the royal protection operation. However, he also acknowledged that his relationship with Queen Camilla had been damaged by the incident, and that rebuilding trust might require time and effort from both parties. The panel deliberated for nearly 2 hours while Thomas waited in an adjacent room. During this time, he considered the various possible outcomes and their implications for his future. Dismissal would end a career that had defined his adult life and eliminate the pension benefits that were crucial to his family's financial security. Reassignment might offer a path forward, but could also be seen as a form of punishment that acknowledged wrongdoing he did not believe he had committed. When the panel reconvened, Sir Edmund delivered their decision with the formal tone appropriate to such a significant moment. He acknowledged the complexity of the situation and the competing considerations that had made their deliberation challenging. He noted Thomas's exemplary record and the genuine professional concerns that had motivated his actions, while also recognizing the importance of maintaining harmonious relationships between royal family members and palace staff. The panel's decision reflected an attempt to balance these various factors while establishing clear guidelines for future situations. Thomas would receive a formal reprimand for his failure to follow Queen Camilla's instruction, acknowledging the disruption his actions had caused and the need to maintain respect for royal authority. However, the reprimand would note that his actions were motivated by professional security concerns rather than personal defiance, and his overall record of service would be preserved. Additionally, the panel recommended that Thomas be reassigned from duties that would bring him into direct contact with Queen Camilla, at least for the immediate future. This arrangement would allow both parties to move forward without the continuing tension that might arise from regular interaction. The reassignment would involve security responsibilities for other members of the royal family or palace operations that did not directly involve Queen Camilla. The panel also announced broader policy changes designed to prevent similar conflicts in the future. New guidelines would be developed to clarify the interaction between royal requests and existing security protocols, ensuring that all palace staff understood their responsibilities and options when such conflicts arose. Training programs would be enhanced to help staff navigate situations where different obligations might appear to conflict. Thomas received the decision with the same composure he had maintained throughout the hearing process. While he was disappointed that his actions had been characterized as requiring disciplinary action, he understood that the panel had attempted to balance competing considerations and preserve his career while addressing the concerns raised by the incident. The reassignment was not ideal, but it offered a path forward that allowed him to continue serving the institution he valued. The immediate aftermath of the hearing involved practical arrangements for Thomas's transition to his new assignment. He would be working with the security detail responsible for protecting other members of the royal family during their public engagements and travel. While this role would still involve the ceremonial duties and protection responsibilities he had trained for, it would operate within a different chain of command and involve different interpersonal dynamics. Thomas's colleagues in the Royal Guard received news of the hearing's outcome with mixed reactions. Some believed that the reprimand was unjustified given his exemplary record and the legitimate professional concerns that had motivated his actions. Others felt that the reassignment was a reasonable compromise that acknowledged both his value as an employee and the need to maintain smooth working relationships within the palace hierarchy. The incident had also generated discussion among palace staff about the broader challenges of serving an institution that was simultaneously ancient and evolving. Many longtime employees expressed appreciation for Thomas's commitment to established protocols while also recognizing the importance of adapting to new leadership styles and expectations. The situation had highlighted tensions that existed throughout the organization as it navigated the balance between tradition and change. Queen Camilla's reaction to the panel's decision was not made public, but sources within the palace suggested that she had accepted the outcome as a reasonable resolution to a difficult situation. The reassignment arrangement would eliminate the potential for future direct conflicts while allowing Thomas to continue contributing his expertise to royal security operations. The policy changes recommended by the panel also addressed her concerns about clarity in staff responsibilities and chain of command. As Thomas prepared to transition to his new assignment, he received messages of support from family members, colleagues, and even some members of the public who had learned about the incident through media reports. While he appreciated these expressions of solidarity, he remained focused on fulfilling his professional responsibilities and contributing to the effective operation of royal security regardless of his specific assignment. The broader implications of the incident extended beyond Thomas's individual situation to questions about how traditional institutions manage change and adaptation. The conflict between Queen Camilla's authority and Thomas's professional protocols had revealed underlying tensions about the pace and nature of changes within the royal household. These tensions would likely continue to influence palace operations as the new reign established its own character and approaches. Thomas's story had also resonated with people outside the palace who faced similar challenges in balancing professional obligations with evolving expectations in their own workplaces. His willingness to stand by his principles despite personal cost had struck a chord with individuals who admired integrity and professional dedication, even when such qualities created temporary difficulties or conflicts with authority figures. The evening after the hearing, Thomas returned home to his family with a mixture of relief and uncertainty about the future. While his career would continue, the path forward was different from what he had expected when he began that fateful morning shift several days earlier. Margaret and their children gathered around the dinner table to discuss the outcome and what it would mean for their family's future. The conversation revealed both the challenges and opportunities inherent in the new situation. Thomas's reassignment would involve different schedules and possibly some travel, requiring adjustments in family routines that had been established over many years. However, it also offered the possibility of new experiences and professional growth within the royal service structure. As the family discussed these practical considerations, Thomas reflected on the principles that had guided his decision and the support he had received from those who understood the importance of standing by one's convictions even when doing so was difficult. The incident had tested not only his professional judgment, but also his character, and he felt confident that he had remained true to the values that had shaped his approach to royal service throughout his career. The news of Thomas Hartwell's confrontation with Queen Camilla spread far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace, reaching into corners of British society where discussions of royal protocol, institutional authority, and individual conscience intersected with broader questions about tradition and change in modern Britain. The story captured public attention not merely as palace gossip, but as a reflection of tensions that many people recognized in their own professional and personal lives. Media coverage of the incident began with brief mentions in royal correspondence reports, but quickly expanded as journalists recognized the broader significance of the story. The conflict between a longtime royal guard's adherence to security protocols and a new queen consort's authority touched on themes that resonated with readers who faced similar challenges in navigating workplace hierarchies, professional obligations, and evolving expectations in their own careers. Thomas found himself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight as details of the incident became public knowledge. Photographers gathered outside his modest London home, hoping to capture images that would accompany the growing number of stories about the guardsmen who had refused to kneel. While Thomas declined to speak with reporters, his neighbors and longtime friends began to share their perspectives on his character and the principles that had guided his decision. Margaret Hartwell struggled with the sudden intrusion into their family's private life. For 25 years, she had been married to a man whose work required discretion and anonymity, whose professional success was measured by his ability to remain invisible while ensuring the safety of others. The transformation of her husband into a public figure, even briefly, created stress and uncertainty that affected every aspect of their daily routine. Their children, James and Sarah, experienced the media attention in different ways. James, who had been considering a career in public service influenced by his father's example, found himself questioning whether he wanted to enter a profession where personal integrity could become the subject of national debate. Sarah, whose work as a teacher had always been separate from her father's royal connections, discovered that her colleagues and students were suddenly very interested in her family background. The public reaction to Thomas's story revealed deep divisions in how people viewed the balance between individual conscience and institutional authority. Letters to newspaper editors, social media discussions, and conversations in pubs and cafes across Britain reflected a spectrum of opinions that cut across traditional political and social boundaries. Some saw Thomas as a hero who had stood up for principle in the face of improper pressure, while others viewed him as insubordinate and disrespectful to legitimate royal authority. Veterans organizations expressed strong support for Thomas, recognizing in his actions the military values of duty, honor, and adherence to protocol that they believed should transcend personal convenience or political pressure. Several retired military officers wrote publicly about the importance of maintaining security procedures even when doing so created uncomfortable situations, arguing that Thomas's decision demonstrated exactly the kind of professional judgment that made British military and security services respected worldwide. Conversely, some royal historians and protocol experts argued that Thomas had misunderstood the nature of his role and the appropriate balance between security concerns and royal prerogatives. They suggested that Queen Camilla's request had been reasonable and that Thomas's refusal represented an outdated interpretation of guard responsibilities that failed to account for the evolving nature of royal engagement with the public and charitable organizations. The incident also sparked discussions within palace walls about the broader challenges facing the institution as it adapted to new leadership and changing social expectations. Senior administrators found themselves addressing questions from staff members about their own obligations and the potential for conflicts between traditional procedures and new approaches favored by King Charles III and Queen Camilla. Thomas's reassignment to the protection detail for other royal family members provided him with new perspectives on how different individuals within the monarchy approach their relationships with security personnel. His new assignment involved primarily protecting Princess and during her official engagements, a role that introduced him to a very different style of royal staff interaction. Princess Anne's approach to security was notably different from what Thomas had experienced with Queen Camilla. Known for her no-nonsense attitude and practical approach to royal duties, Princess Anne treated her protection officers as professional colleagues whose expertise she respected and relied upon. She consulted with Thomas and his colleagues about security arrangements, listened to their recommendations, and incorporated their concerns into her planning for public engagements. The contrast was immediately apparent to Thomas as he adjusted to his new assignment. Where Queen Camilla had seemed to view security protocols as constraints that interfered with her vision for royal engagement, Princess Anne understood them as necessary tools that enabled her to fulfill her public responsibilities safely and effectively. The difference in approach created a working environment where Thomas felt valued for his professional expertise rather than constrained by hierarchical expectations. Thomas's first major assignment with Princess Anne involved a series of visits to agricultural colleges and rural communities across Scotland. The princess's patron role with various farming and agricultural organizations required extensive travel and interaction with groups whose security requirements were often complex and unpredictable. Thomas's experience and attention to detail proved valuable in managing the logistics of these engagements while ensuring appropriate protection for the princess. During the Scottish tour, Thomas began to rebuild his confidence in his professional judgment and his value to the royal protection operation. Princess Anne's genuine appreciation for his expertise and her collaborative approach to security planning reminded him why he had chosen this career and why his family's tradition of royal service had been a source of pride for generations. The work was challenging and meaningful in ways that transcended the personal conflicts he had experienced with Queen Camilla. The media attention surrounding Thomas's story gradually diminished as other news captured public interest, but the incident continued to influence discussions about institutional change and individual responsibility within organizations facing evolution and adaptation. Academic researchers studying organizational behavior began using Thomas's situation as a case study in how traditional institutions navigate conflicts between established procedures and new leadership approaches. Thomas received several offers to share his story publicly, including interview requests from television programs and publishers interested in developing his experience into a book about royal service and institutional loyalty. He declined all such offers, believing that public discussion of internal palace dynamics would be inappropriate regardless of the circumstances that had brought him to public attention. His commitment to discretion remained unchanged despite the unwanted publicity. The incident had also attracted attention from international observers interested in how constitutional monarchies balance tradition with adaptation to contemporary expectations. Royal correspondents from other European countries with constitutional monarchies noted the British situation as an example of tensions that existed within all such institutions as they sought to maintain relevance and effectiveness in changing social and political environments. Queen Camilla's public schedule continued without reference to the incident, but palace insiders noted subtle changes in how she approached events involving multiple staff members and complex protocols. The experience appeared to have influenced her understanding of the institutional constraints within which royal activities operated and the importance of working collaboratively with experienced palace personnel to achieve her objectives. Several months after the incident, Thomas encountered Queen Camilla briefly during a palace function where multiple protection details were coordinating security for a large state reception. The interaction was formal and professional, acknowledging their respective roles without revisiting the conflict that had led to his reassignment. Both parties appeared to have moved forward from the incident while maintaining the boundaries necessary for effective institutional operation. Thomas's colleagues within the Royal Protection Service had varying opinions about the long-term implications of his experience. Some believed that his willingness to stand by professional principles had strengthened the position of security personnel in future discussions about protocol and procedure. Others worried that the incident had created unnecessary tension and might make royal family members more hesitant to work collaboratively with protection officers. The training programs for new royal protection officers began incorporating discussions of the Thomas Hartwell incident as an example of the complex situations that could arise when security protocols and royal preferences appeared to conflict. Instructors emphasized the importance of clear communication, advanced planning, and understanding the reasoning behind established procedures while also being responsive to legitimate requests for adaptation and flexibility. Thomas's experience also influenced broader palace policies regarding staff training and the communication of expectations between royal family members and their support personnel. New protocols were developed to ensure that staff members understood both their professional obligations and the appropriate channels for addressing concerns when different requirements appeared to conflict. The charitable organizations that had been present during the original incident expressed appreciation for the respectful way all parties had handled the situation and its aftermath. Several organization leaders noted that the professionalism demonstrated by both Thomas and Queen Camilla in managing their disagreement had actually reinforced their confidence in the institutional integrity of the royal household. As Thomas settled into his new role with Princess and's protection detail, he found opportunities to mentor younger officers who were beginning their careers in royal service. His experience navigating complex institutional dynamics and maintaining professional standards under pressure provided valuable guidance for colleagues facing their own challenges in balancing multiple obligations and expectations. The incident had tested not only Thomas's professional judgment, but also his personal resilience and his family's ability to withstand unexpected public scrutiny. Margaret Hartwell gradually adjusted to the knowledge that their family's story had become part of the public record, while James and Sarah developed their own perspectives on their father's actions and their implications for their own career choices and life decisions. Thomas's story continued to resonate with people facing similar challenges in their own professional lives, particularly those working in organizations where tradition and innovation created tension and where individual employees sometimes found themselves caught between competing loyalties and obligations. His willingness to accept personal cost to maintain professional integrity had inspired others facing difficult decisions about principle and pragmatism. The broader questions raised by Thomas's experience extended beyond the specific context of royal service to fundamental issues about how institutions maintain their essential character while adapting to new leadership and changing expectations. His story illustrated both the value of institutional memory and professional standards, and the challenges inherent in balancing stability with necessary evolution. As the months passed, and Thomas's career continued within the Royal Protection Service, the incident that had briefly made him a public figure began to be understood as one example of the ongoing process through which traditional institutions navigate change while preserving their core values and functions. The specific conflict between Thomas and Queen Camilla had been resolved through compromise and accommodation, but the underlying tensions between tradition and innovation continued to influence palace operations. Thomas's commitment to his professional responsibilities remained unchanged by the experience, strengthened rather than weakened by having been tested under difficult circumstances. His continued service with Princess and demonstrated that institutional conflicts could be managed without compromising either individual integrity or organizational effectiveness, provided that all parties approached such situations with respect for legitimate concerns and willingness to find constructive solutions. The legacy of Thomas Hartwell's decision to remain standing while Queen Camilla knelt would continue to influence discussions about professional responsibility, institutional loyalty, and individual conscience long after the immediate controversy had faded from public attention. His story had become part of the ongoing narrative of how traditional institutions evolve while maintaining their essential character and purpose. 2 years had passed since the incident that had transformed Thomas Hartwell from an anonymous royal guard into a reluctant symbol of institutional integrity and personal conscience. The media attention had long since faded, but the experience had fundamentally changed both Thomas's understanding of his role within the royal household and the broader institution's approach to managing conflicts between tradition and evolving expectations. Thomas's work with Princess Anne's protection detail had proven both professionally satisfying and personally redemptive. The princess's straightforward approach to royal duties and her genuine respect for the expertise of her security team had created a working environment where Thomas felt valued and effective. His reputation within the Royal Protection Service had not only recovered from the controversy, but had been enhanced by his demonstrated ability to maintain professional standards under pressure. The Scottish agricultural tour had been followed by numerous other assignments that had taken Thomas across Britain and to several international destinations where Princess Anne fulfilled her royal obligations. Each engagement had reinforced his confidence in his professional judgment and his value to the protection operation. The collaborative relationship he had developed with Princess Anne stood in sharp contrast to the conflict that had characterized his final interactions with Queen Camilla. During a visit to a veterans rehabilitation center in Yorkshire, Thomas encountered several former military personnel who recognized him from the media coverage of his stand against Queen Camilla. Their expressions of support and understanding reminded him that his actions had resonated beyond the palace walls with people who understood the importance of maintaining professional standards and personal integrity, even when doing so created personal difficulties. Margaret Hartwell had gradually adjusted to the knowledge that their family's story had become part of the public record, but she remained grateful that the intense media scrutiny had been brief and that Thomas's career had continued successfully. The financial security provided by his continued employment and eventual pension had been preserved, ensuring that their family's future remained stable despite the temporary uncertainty created by the disciplinary proceedings. James Hartwell had ultimately decided to pursue a career in civil service, inspired rather than deterred by his father's example of principled decision-making. He had completed his training and begun work in the Foreign Office, where his understanding of institutional dynamics and personal integrity, learned through observing his father's career, proved valuable in navigating the complex world of diplomatic service. Sarah Hartwell had continued her teaching career, but had developed a deeper appreciation for the challenges faced by people whose work required balancing competing obligations and expectations. Her father's experience had influenced her approach to classroom management, and her understanding of how to help students develop their own moral reasoning and decision-making capabilities. The incident had also led to lasting changes within the royal household that extended far beyond Thomas's individual situation. The policy recommendations that had emerged from his disciplinary hearing had been implemented through comprehensive training programs and updated procedures that clarified the relationship between security protocols and royal requests for ceremonial participation. New royal protection officers now received specific training in communication techniques designed to help them explain security concerns to royal family members in ways that promoted understanding and collaboration rather than conflict. The program emphasized that effective protection required mutual respect and clear communication between all parties, and that professional disagreements could be managed constructively when approached with appropriate understanding and flexibility. Queen Camilla's own approach to working with palace staff had evolved considerably since the incident with Thomas. While she maintained her vision for innovative approaches to royal engagement and charitable work, she had developed a greater appreciation for the institutional knowledge and professional expertise of longtime palace employees. Her staff reported that she had become more collaborative in her planning processes and more receptive to input from security and protocol specialists. The charitable reception format that had been the setting for the original conflict had been modified based on lessons learned from the experience. Future events of similar nature included advance briefings for all participants that clarified expectations and addressed potential concerns before public ceremonies began. This approach prevented misunderstandings and ensured that all parties could participate appropriately while fulfilling their respective responsibilities. Thomas's reputation within the broader security community had been enhanced rather than damaged by the incident. His willingness to maintain professional standards despite personal cost had earned him respect from colleagues across various branches of government and military service. Several professional organizations had recognized his commitment to security protocols as an example of the principles that should guide all personnel responsible for protecting public officials. The incident had also attracted attention from international security professionals interested in how different countries manage the intersection of ceremonial traditions and practical security requirements. Thomas had been invited to speak at several conferences about the importance of maintaining consistent security standards while adapting to evolving expectations and changing leadership styles within traditional institutions. During one such conference in Edinburgh, Thomas met security professionals from other European royal families who shared similar challenges in balancing protocol, tradition, and practical security requirements. The international perspective reinforced his understanding that the conflicts he had experienced were part of broader patterns that affected traditional institutions worldwide as they adapted to contemporary expectations. Princess Anne had become not just Thomas's assignment, but also something of a mentor in understanding how experienced royal family members navigated the balance between personal preferences and institutional requirements. Her decades of royal service had taught her that effective royal work required collaboration with knowledgeable staff and respect for the procedures that enabled the monarchy to function safely and effectively. The princess had shared with Thomas her own experiences of learning to work within institutional constraints while finding ways to innovate and improve royal engagement with the public. Her perspective helped him understand that the conflict with Queen Camilla had not been simply about personal authority, but about different approaches to managing the tension between tradition and change that characterized all aspects of royal service. Thomas's work with Princess Anne had also provided him with opportunities to understand the broader challenges facing the monarchy as it sought to maintain relevance and effectiveness in contemporary Britain. The princess's extensive charitable work and her practical approach to royal duties illustrated how traditional institutions could evolve while preserving their essential character and purpose. The agricultural communities that comprised much of Princess Anne's constituency had particularly appreciated Thomas's professional approach to security and his understanding of rural environments. His background growing up outside London had given him insights into rural life that proved valuable in planning protection for events in farming communities and agricultural settings. During a visit to a horse breeding facility in Ireland, Thomas encountered a former colleague from his early years in the Royal Guard who had left palace service to work in private security. Their conversation provided Thomas with perspective on how his skills and experience might translate to other career opportunities should he choose to leave royal service in the future. However, Thomas found that his commitment to royal service had actually been strengthened by the challenges he had faced and overcome. The incident with Queen Camilla had tested his resolve and clarified his understanding of his professional values, while his subsequent work with Princess Anne had reminded him of the satisfaction and meaning he derived from protecting people who dedicated their lives to public service. The annual performance review process within the Royal Protection Service had been modified partly in response to lessons learned from Thomas's situation. New evaluation criteria explicitly recognized the importance of professional judgment and adherence to security protocols, while also acknowledging the value of adaptability and collaborative problem-solving. The changes ensured that future performance assessments would consider the full range of skills and qualities required for effective royal protection. Thomas received commendations for his work with Princess Anne that specifically noted his ability to maintain high security standards while building positive working relationships and contributing to successful public engagements. The recognition validated his professional approach and confirmed that his career had not been permanently damaged by the conflict with Queen Camilla. As Thomas approached his 25th year of royal service, he began to consider the legacy he wanted to leave and the example he hoped to set for younger officers joining the protection service. His experience had taught him valuable lessons about the importance of clear communication, mutual respect, and unwavering commitment to professional standards that he wanted to pass on to the next generation of royal protection personnel. The mentoring role he had begun to play with newer officers had become one of the most satisfying aspects of his work. Sharing his experience and insights with young men and women beginning their careers in royal service allowed Thomas to contribute to the institution's future while honoring the tradition of service that had been passed down through his own family. Margaret Hartwell had watched her husband's career recovery with pride and relief, but also with deeper understanding of the principles that had guided his decision to remain standing when Queen Camilla requested that everyone kneel. The experience had tested their marriage and family relationships, but ultimately had strengthened their appreciation for Thomas's character and their confidence in his judgment. The Hartwell family's annual vacation to Scotland had taken on new meaning as Thomas's work with Princess and had given him deeper appreciation for the landscapes and communities they visited. His professional responsibilities had enhanced rather than detracted from his personal enjoyment of the places and people that comprised much of Princess Anne's constituency. Thomas's story had been incorporated into case studies used in leadership training programs across various government departments and military branches. His willingness to maintain professional standards despite personal cost had become an example of the kind of decision-making that effective institutions required from their employees, particularly those in positions of trust and responsibility. The broader questions raised by Thomas's experience continued to influence academic research into organizational behavior and institutional change. Scholars studying how traditional organizations managed evolution and adaptation frequently referenced his situation as an illustration of the complex dynamics that arose when established procedures and new leadership approaches appeared to conflict. The incident had also influenced international discussions about constitutional monarchy and the balance between royal authority and institutional procedures. Royal correspondents and constitutional experts from other countries had studied the British experience as an example of how such conflicts could be managed without undermining either individual integrity or institutional effectiveness. As Thomas reflected on the trajectory of his career and the unexpected challenges he had faced, he felt confident that he had remained true to the principles that had guided his family's tradition of royal service, while also learning valuable lessons about adaptation, communication, and the complex dynamics of institutional life. The experience had been difficult, but it had ultimately strengthened both his professional capabilities and his personal understanding of his role within the broader institution he served. The upcoming celebration of Thomas's 25th year of service would provide an opportunity to recognize not only his longevity and dedication, but also his contribution to the evolution of royal protection procedures and his role in helping the institution navigate the challenges of adapting tradition to contemporary expectations. His story had become part of the ongoing narrative of how the monarchy continued to serve Britain while honoring its historical foundations and embracing necessary change. The silver invitation that arrived at Thomas Hartwell's home on a crisp autumn morning carried the royal seal and bore news that would mark another unexpected chapter in his already remarkable career. King Charles III had decided to personally recognize Thomas's 25 years of dedicated service with a private audience, an honor that was both rare and deeply meaningful for someone whose profession typically required anonymity and self-effacement. Margaret Hartwell held the invitation with trembling hands, understanding immediately the significance of this royal recognition. After the turmoil and uncertainty that had followed Thomas's confrontation with Queen Camilla 3 years earlier, this gesture from the king himself represented not just acknowledgement of Thomas's service, but validation of the principles that had guided his difficult decision to remain standing when protocol and royal request had seemed to conflict. Thomas read the invitation several times, each reading deepening his appreciation for the honor being bestowed upon him. The audience with King Charles III would take place in the king's private study at Clarence House, away from the formal ceremonial settings that typically characterized royal interactions with palace staff. The intimate nature of the meeting suggested that this was not merely a routine recognition of service length, but something more personal and meaningful. The 3 years since the incident had transformed Thomas from a reluctant public figure back into the anonymous professional he had always preferred to be, but the experience had also deepened his understanding of his role within the broader institution of the monarchy. His continued service with Princess Anne's protection detail had not only rehabilitated his reputation but had demonstrated the value of maintaining professional standards while adapting to different leadership styles and expectations. Princess Anne herself had been instrumental in recommending Thomas for special recognition, writing a detailed commendation that praised not only his technical competence and professional dedication but also his moral courage in standing by his convictions during a difficult period. Her recommendation had carried particular weight because of her own reputation for direct communication and her insistence on excellence from the staff who supported her work. The week before his audience with the king, Thomas spent considerable time preparing not just his uniform and appearance, but his thoughts about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The confrontation with Queen Camilla, which had once seemed like a potential career-ending disaster, had ultimately led to personal growth, professional development, and a deeper understanding of the complex dynamics that governed royal service in the modern era. Margaret and the children shared in Thomas's preparation for this momentous occasion, understanding that this recognition extended beyond his individual achievement to validation of the family values and traditions that had guided multiple generations of Hartwell service to the crown. James, now established in his Foreign Office career, took leave to be present when his father received this honor. Sarah arranged for substitute teaching coverage so she could support her father during this significant moment in his career. The morning of the audience dawned clear and bright, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of the Hartwell family home as Thomas prepared for what would likely be the most memorable day of his professional life. His dress uniform had been meticulously prepared, every button polished to perfection, every insignia positioned precisely according to regulations that he had learned to observe with passionate attention to detail. Margaret helped Thomas with the final adjustments to his uniform, her hands steady despite the emotion of the moment. She thought about their wedding day 28 years earlier, when Thomas had worn his dress uniform for their ceremony, and about all the years of dedicated service that had brought them to this moment of recognition and honor. The journey to Clarence House took Thomas through familiar London streets where he had walked and worked for more than 2 decades, but today the familiar sights seemed invested with new meaning as he approached this culmination of his career in royal service. The knowledge that King Charles III had personally chosen to recognize his service created a sense of completion and validation that extended far beyond professional satisfaction. Upon arrival at Clarence House, Thomas was received by the king's private secretary and conducted through corridors that spoke of centuries of royal history and tradition. The building itself represented the continuity of the institution he had served, while the personal touches that reflected King Charles III's particular interests and character illustrated how individual personalities shaped and influenced the broader institutional culture. The king's private study was a comfortable room filled with books, personal photographs, and artwork that reflected his wide-ranging interests and deep engagement with cultural and environmental issues. King Charles III rose from his desk as Thomas was announced, extending his hand in greeting with a warmth that immediately put Thomas at ease despite the formal nature of the occasion. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 40 minutes, far longer than the brief formal recognition Thomas had anticipated. King Charles III demonstrated detailed knowledge of Thomas's service record, his family background, and the circumstances that had led to his confrontation with Queen Camilla. The king's understanding of the situation was nuanced and thoughtful, acknowledging the complexity of the institutional dynamics while recognizing the professional integrity that had guided Thomas's actions. King Charles III spoke about his own understanding of the challenges facing the monarchy as it sought to balance tradition with necessary adaptation to contemporary expectations. He acknowledged that the incident involving Queen Camilla had highlighted important questions about communication, institutional procedures, and the balance between royal authority and professional expertise that required ongoing attention and careful management. The king expressed particular appreciation for Thomas's discretion in handling the aftermath of the incident, noting that his refusal to seek public attention or exploit the situation for personal gain had demonstrated the kind of character that made royal service possible. He emphasized that institutional integrity depended on people who were willing to prioritize their professional obligations over personal advantage, even when doing so created temporary difficulties. Thomas found himself able to speak candidly with King Charles III about his experience, sharing insights about the challenges and rewards of royal protection work, while also discussing the broader questions about institutional change that had been highlighted by his experience. The king's genuine interest in these topics and his thoughtful questions created an atmosphere of mutual respect and understanding. The formal part of the audience concluded with King Charles III presenting Thomas with a personal medallion that had been specially commissioned to recognize his service. The medallion bore the royal cipher and an inscription acknowledging 25 years of dedicated service, but it also included a personal note from the king expressing appreciation for Thomas's contribution to the institutional integrity of the royal household. Following the presentation, King Charles III invited Thomas to join him for tea, an unprecedented gesture that transformed the formal audience into something approaching a personal conversation between two men who shared a deep commitment to the institution of the monarchy, albeit from very different perspectives and roles. The relaxed atmosphere allowed for discussion of topics ranging from Thomas's family background to his hopes for the future of royal service. The king spoke about his own learning process as he had adapted to his role as monarch, acknowledging that effective leadership required listening to experienced advisors and understanding the institutional knowledge that had been developed over decades of practice. He expressed particular appreciation for staff members like Thomas who combined technical expertise with moral courage and institutional loyalty. Thomas shared with the king his perspectives on the evolving challenges facing royal protection in an era of increased security concerns and changing public expectations. His insights, gained through years of practical experience, provided the king with valuable understanding of the operational realities that shaped daily life within the royal household. The conversation also touched on Thomas's work with Princess Anne, which had provided him with opportunities to see how experienced royal family members navigated the balance between personal preferences and institutional requirements. The king expressed appreciation for his sister's mentorship of Thomas and her role in helping him recover from the difficulties he had experienced. As their time together drew to a close, King Charles III expressed hope that Thomas would consider extending his service beyond the traditional retirement age, noting that his experience and judgment would be valuable assets as the monarchy continued to evolve and adapt to changing circumstances. The suggestion represented not just professional recognition, but personal confidence in Thomas's continued contribution to royal service. Thomas left Clarence House with a profound sense of completion and validation, carrying with him not just the physical medallion that recognized his service, but also the knowledge that his commitment to professional integrity had been understood and appreciated at the highest levels of the institution he had served. The private audience had transformed what might have been a routine service recognition into something deeply personal and meaningful. The drive home provided Thomas with time to reflect on the extraordinary journey that had brought him from an 18-year-old recruit following in his family's footsteps to a veteran guardsman receiving personal recognition from the king. The confrontation with Queen Camilla, which had once seemed like a crisis that might end his career, now appeared as one chapter in a larger story of professional growth and institutional service. Margaret and the children were waiting anxiously for Thomas's return, eager to hear about every detail of his audience with King Charles III. The family gathering that evening to celebrate this honor became a reflection on the values and traditions that had guided their lives and the satisfaction that came from maintaining those principles even when doing so required courage and sacrifice. The medallion that Thomas had received found its place of honor in the family home alongside the photographs and certificates that documented 4 generations of Hartwell service to the crown. The display represented not just individual achievement, but family tradition and the ongoing commitment to values that transcended personal convenience or temporary difficulty. In the days that followed his audience with the king, Thomas received congratulations from colleagues throughout the Royal Protection Service and beyond. The recognition from King Charles III had validated not just his individual service, but the principles of professional integrity and institutional loyalty that guided all personnel responsible for protecting the royal family. Princess Anne, upon learning of Thomas's audience with her brother, expressed her own satisfaction that his contributions had been recognized at the highest level. Her support during his difficult period had been instrumental in his career recovery, and his subsequent exemplary service had vindicated her confidence in his character and professional capabilities. The broader implications of Thomas's story continued to resonate within the royal household and beyond, serving as an example of how institutional conflicts could be managed constructively when all parties approached such situations with mutual respect and commitment to shared values. His experience had contributed to policy changes that would benefit future generations of royal staff, while also demonstrating the importance of maintaining professional standards even under pressure. As Thomas looked toward the future, he felt confident that his service had made a meaningful contribution to the institution he loved, while also providing an example for his children and colleagues of how to navigate complex ethical and professional challenges with integrity and courage. The recognition from King Charles III had provided the perfect conclusion to a career that had tested and ultimately validated the principles that had guided 4 generations of Hartwell family service to the crown. The story of the royal guard who had refused to kneel had become part of the ongoing narrative of how traditional institutions adapt and evolve while maintaining their essential character and purpose. Thomas Hartwell's legacy would extend far beyond his individual service to include his contribution to the broader understanding of how personal integrity and institutional loyalty could work together to strengthen rather than threaten the organizations that depend on both for their continued effectiveness and public trust. His journey from crisis to recognition illustrated the timeless truth that standing by one's principles, even when doing so creates temporary difficulties, ultimately strengthens both individual character and institutional integrity in ways that benefit everyone who shares commitment to excellence and service.